with introductions. We have here Assemblymen Rivera, Trainee Steele, and Demboski, and Chair Dyson. Our agenda today is to do with two things: the internal audit that was produced by Mr. Chadwick, who is here, and the update on the CAFR. Mike, would you like to introduce this? Administration people are here.
David Persinger from AWU, Ron Haddon, the purchasing official, and myself. Robert Harris, another member of the audit committee, is out of town and not available today. Our third position is currently vacant, pending appointment by or confirmation of an appointment, which will be made, I believe, at the next assembly meeting. So, Tom Fink is left municipal service. We'll be appointing Tammy Clayton, the new municipal controller, I believe either in the August 22nd or September 12th meeting.
All right.
So for today, 2 muni seats are vacant, and I am the lone administration representative.
I'd like an even train.
All right. So want to get to the questions that assembly members have, and if there's additional information you want, we'll submit that to whoever. We will ask questions, and Mike, if you want, I'll let you referee to who should answer it.
I think in the near term, Mike Chadwick and Ron Haddon are the experts on the subject of the internal audit report.
All right, and anytime you want to weigh in, and once an assembly member, I recognize you and ask a question, I will certainly allow some give and take, and you don't have to get my permission to continue the conversation. And the same is true with you all that are answering. As I understand it, we take no action except on an exception basis. If at the end of this we say we do not want to refer this on to the assembly for approval until we get information X or Y, and so on and so forth. And I'll try to do that before we end here, and we'll probably all have a sense of it. All right, Mike, do you want to give us a summary of your audit, how you did it, and what you found?
Sure, yeah. This is our annual P-card audit. We do it every year. P-card purchases have increased from about 46,000, the number of purchases, to about 48,000. The dollar value has also increased. This continues to be an excellent way to procure goods and services, typically low-cost goods and services. It reduces a lot of the paperwork that the purchasing department previously did years ago. This time around, we had 2 findings. Our first finding was transactions were split to circumvent the dollar limit, and we identified 24 purchases totaling about $110,000 that had been done to split the transaction limit. And our second finding, we had a number of questionable purchases that had been made. Examples of these were flu vaccinations, food and related items for various meetings, a gift for employees, artwork for Christmas cards, those types of things. In the grand scheme of things, these purchases did not amount to a whole lot. However, by doing this audit, it lets employees be aware that someone is going to be coming and looking at these things. The good thing is we didn't find fur coats and diamond rings,
bar bills,
in the P-card purchases. Generally speaking, most employees are following the P-card guidelines. We just have some of these purchases that look questionable and then these split purchases.
So you found none that were a personal, private benefit of the purchaser?
Not that I recall, no.
Did you find any that the expediency of an emergency made it clumsy for the people to get back online or whatever because of a clumsy purchasing process?
No, none of these didn't appear to be emergency type of purchases. No. It just looked like they had circumvented the dollar limit, not because they had an expedited purchase, but they just circumvented it.
Questions from assembly members? Mr. Steele?
It just seems to me that the P card is working the way you want it to work. 48,000 purchases are a bunch.
That's a lot.
And if you didn't have it, I'm sure there would be more disruption and doing without for a lot of activities. And so I think it's proven it's, I'm glad you're watching. I'm glad you're making everybody understand that you're watching. And good job as far as I'm concerned.
Mrs. Dimboski?
Thank you. Mr. Chadwick, can you talk to us a little bit, some of the purchases that were made were in direct violation of city policy and procedures. When you say, can you explain to us what some of these were in a little bit more detail and from which departments you saw the prevalence? And then the second question I have is you said some of these purchases were nominal, like there wasn't a lot of money when it comes to some of the ones the policies that you can't buy it. How much is that?
Okay. For your first question on these split purchases, items included things such as, when you look like the fire department, they had conference room chairs, recliners, batteries for vehicles, like their big engine trucks. For a police department, they bought explosives. For AMU, there was a Wi-Fi install, rental of a scissor lift.
Oh, what install?
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi. Oh.
For equal rights in the IT department, furniture had been bought. ML&P, they had projector screens, monitors, carpet again. So those are some of the types of purchases that had been made. For these questionable purchases, like the Christmas card, the design work and the artwork for the Christmas card is about $260 for that.
Which department was that?
That was the port.
Okay.
That was who?
The port.
Some of the appliances, you had teapot for $33. You had a microwave oven for $179. You had a coffee maker for $625.
$625 coffee maker?
Mhm.
Are you kidding me?
No.
Was that for the assembly?
No.
Red
on
it? Now, what department bought a $625 coffee maker?
Able.
Dave's here to explain.
Must be getting fluoride out of the water or something.
The flu vaccinations, those came about $4,600.
And do we typically provide flu vaccine? What department was that? Was that AFP?
That was AFD.
Okay, that makes sense. And that's something that we typically provide our first responders, isn't it?
You know, I'm not aware of that. I've never seen that purchase before, but that doesn't mean it hasn't happened before.
Okay, I'll ask Mike that. Is that your laundry list?
That's kind of my laundry list here.
Okay.
Just, Mr.
Yeah,
Steele?
the cost of those flu vaccines are nominal compared to outages, people being out of work. And so every one that works effectively saves a lot of money.
Yeah, I think we put it on our questionable list because of his health insurance.
Mr. Chair.
Are they covered by health insurance?
Fred.
I mean, as the shots are?
Yeah. If you
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Flu shots are covered by health
Okay.
insurance. At least
That's,
on the health insurance, yeah.
But remember, that means we're paying it.
yeah, one way or another.
So the firefighters are not in our plan, so it's somewhat indirect, but,
That's true.
right. It's not a disallowed expense, is my understanding. And the P card program does not say you can't use it for flu shots. So I think the question Mike is raising is that a valid municipal expense or municipal charge?
When you're covered with health insurance.
Well, and I'd like to follow up on the flu shot, just since we started. I know my husband's gotten flu shots forever at AFD when he works, and I think now, is it true to say, Mike, that now we have vendors or contractors that are going into the stations and they're giving the crews
I
shots?
believe that is the case, and I think the question is, how are we paying the vendor?
Right, and that's why I think in the past, for years, the guys would go somewhere, and now they're coming in station.
Right, and there are typically people that miss the shot, they're absent on the day that their shift station gets covered, so if they go to Walgreens to get a flu shot instead of, is that something they should use their P card on? Anyway, it's entirely appropriate that that issue gets flagged in the audit. We may not agree that it's not an appropriate use of the P card. And I think in this case, Mike's not saying that it violates the P card rules, which is the case with some of his findings. It's just questioning or asking us to verify that it's an appropriate municipal expense.
I don't have a problem with the flu shots for first responders. I think that's reasonable. I am very curious about a $625 coffee maker.
All right.
How many people does this serve?
We can ask AWU to
Explain it.
explain that. Maybe you draw a picture of it on somebody's paycheck. Mr. Rivera?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as a neophyte, I just have a couple of probably simple questions regarding the split transactions. So what is the P card limit? Is there a standard limit or is it different?
And we're going to have Mr. Haddon here, the purchase,
Sure.
ask him to do a bit of an explanation on it. You
Oh,
wanna
okay.
hold off for that?
Sure, I can hold off, and then if there's
All right,
any remaining
yeah.
questions. Sure.
Dick?
Mike, I see the Anchorage Equal Rights Commission split it for $4,580. What did they buy?
Furniture. They bought some a bench.
For their office or?
Bench and some chairs for their office area.
They just split the purchase
They split the
so they wouldn't be going over it? Okay.
So they could use their P card. They probably had P card limits. As Ron's going to describe, there's a very simple way for a department to increase on a one-time basis their P card limit. Literally, it happens with a phone call or an email, and then they don't have to split it. Again, I don't think the issue is that this was an inappropriate purchase. They had the budget, they had the need. Question was, they didn't use their P card properly.
I just want to make sure he's told them how to do it correctly, so next
Oh,
year
yeah.
it doesn't creep up again. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Haddon, would you explain the origins of the P card process and the evolution in the limits and so on that's been going forward?
Well, thank you for the opportunity. The P card limit, or the P card program was established probably about 15, 20 years ago as a method to, another tool in the toolbox, so to speak, for low dollar, high volume purchases. Because depending upon what study you, in your references, early or as late as 2016, the studies have shown the cost of processing a purchase order runs anywhere from $55 all the way up to $453. All depends on how you allocate the cost and what cost you use in that and how efficient your purchasing office is. So the P card program was established actually a number of years ago. Over the years, it has evolved to the point now that we have around 437 P card holders between general government and the utilities. The average limit currently is $2,500 per transaction. We have, for IT coordinators, we have recently raised that to $4,000, and we are looking at raising the limit to $4,000 across the board. We're still evaluating that. As far as how do you increase your P card limit, it takes a phone call and an email to our P card administrator. She will evaluate the request. If she thinks it's warranted, she forwards it to me for my approval, and then we will provide written approval for the individual's P card to raise that limit. At times, we have raised it over the $5,000 limit. Again, depending on what the individual is buying. If they're buying a piece of equipment that we really have, that's a standard piece of equipment, and we've gone through a quote process to make sure we have a reasonable price, then I will approve that to be purchased through a P card. Depends on what the risk is to the municipality. If there's limited risk to us and limited risk to the department, then I have no objection with raising the limit to expedite the purchase, particularly on those items that are routine items and that are standard commercial items.
Excuse me, in our visit this morning, I thought I understood you to say that you can also expedite the purchase order process. Would you explain that to us, please?
Yes, sir. What I can, the current process prior to SAP coming online is for a purchase order to be processed, the department will prepare a paper requisition form. Forward that paper requisition form once it has appropriate departmental approvals to the purchasing office. We will input that into PeopleSoft. It goes through an overnight process to do what they call a budget check, i.e. verify the money is there that we can spend. Then depending on what it is they're buying and the method they want to purchase it, we will then process that into a purchase order. In extreme circumstances or emergencies, they can call. We will expedite that purchase. If it is a true emergency, the mayor has the ability to waive all Title VII procedures. We go to the mayor in a written form, get approval from that. We report that to the next assembly meeting if we have to waive Title VII. If it's something that doesn't require Title VII, just requires an expediting of the purchasing process, as long as they call and communicate to us, we can have a purchase order prepared in as little as hours, once we verify the money is there. So the processes are in place to prepare purchase orders expeditiously if necessary.
Mr. Riviere?
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. That answers a couple of my questions. So, just so I can be clear, sort of what exactly this middle column here, a number of split transactions. So let's just use the Anchorage Fire Department as an example. There were 6 split transactions. Could you, just on a general scope, define what that means when you say 6 split transactions?
What a split transaction is, it means that the individual has a limit on their P card of $2,500. They decided they would go out and buy one item for $2,400. They'd go out and buy a similar item or the identical item the next day for $2,400, or they might do it. They're just splitting the requirement.
Okay, thank you.
To avoid an arbitrary.
Thank you. And then I just have one last question, Mr. Chair. So is this a finding that's been common in the past, or is this something that's crept up on us?
Split transactions, you're going to, depending on how hard you look and what kind of criteria you use, it's not an unusual finding. It's something we continue to train on. And if I find individuals that continue to do that, I have no problems in pulling their P card. And the municipal manager has been extremely supportive of backing that up. Say, if you have problems, Ron, take the P card. And we have done that.
And that can lead to relatively severe consequences for an employee. If your job requires you to use a P card and you cannot, because you have demonstrated that you are not capable of successfully using the P card, then it's just like having a CDL. If your job requires you have a CDL and for whatever reason you can't get a CDL, you may not be successful in that position. So that is not an inconsequential outcome.
In a minute, I'm going to ask you if a record of that goes in the personnel file. We'll come back to that, Mr. Dembrowski.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Haddon, just following up on that, the recommendation of the auditor was that you should consider suspending privileges to the users that circumvented the process and intentionally was splitting their transactions. After evaluation of each of these cases of split transactions, was it, in your opinion, required to suspend any of the privileges of any of these employees?
No, ma'am, it was not. What I do is I look at, is there a history of that employee violating? If there is a history of that, then I suspend the card. If there's no history of it, say it looks like it's a one-time isolated instance, then I'm gonna talk to their supervisor, who talks to them, and we monitor.
And just to follow up, it appears, management's been very responsive, with the audit that came out. My assumption is, and can you confirm, or somebody confirm, that each of these individuals that have these split transactions, they've been, the policy's been discussed with them in the process for, if you have an expenditure come up in the future, this is how you do it, you don't split it.
Yes, ma'am, we had to reissue all purchasing cards in July because we moved from the swipe to the chip card, and at that time we retrained all individuals to reissue.
Specifically, the ones that were found in the audit, okay.
All right, I'm going to let Mr. Trainee answer a question, and Mr. Haddon, I believe it was you said to me that the whole new internet whole city system will also expedite the purchasing process, but we'll wait till after Mr. Trainee's question.
Ron, without naming names, how often have we pulled somebody's card in the last 5 years?
I can tell you in the last year, we've probably pulled 10 cards, well, suspended. What I do is I suspend them for 30 days the first time. Second time, I'll suspend them 60 days. Third time, I'll get it. If I get to it.
How many we had go 3 times? I mean,
Have had none.
okay. Thank you.
Would you explain what you expect the streamlining of the system will be with the new electronic operating systems?
Yes, sir, thank you. When we implement SAP, one of the changes that is coming down is, instead of that paper requisition process I explained just a minute ago, there is no more paper. It will be an electronic requisition process the department will fill out. It's now called a shopping cart, it's a purchase requisition. It will fill out an online form, and depending on the dollar value of that particular transaction, it will either could take as many as 3 or 4 individuals to approve it, but it will flow relatively seamlessly through an automated workflow process to where when purchasing then gets the requisition, it's fully approved, we don't have to wait for it to go through the budget check process. It will already have done that through the SAP process. And then the other thing that will expedite the process is for those requirements that are under $5,000 and that the individuals have quotes and have identified a vendor, we will issue what's called an automated PO. It will go directly to the vendor, email it to the vendor, not mail, email to the vendor, so that will also improve the process.
Mr. Dombrowski?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If possible, I'd like the department directors that are here to be able to address the purchases in their departments and what proactive steps they've taken to make sure they've rectified any potential issues they see.
I don't think we have anybody but AWW and sir.
I haven't actually reviewed the audit. The coffee pot that you mentioned, that was purchased for the water treatment facility. That's a 24-hour facility. It's a commercial style, looking to see maybe the gas station. We also hold staff meetings as well as board meetings here periodically. As far as the other ones, I'm not aware of whether split purchases with utility.
I think AWU, one of the other issues, wasn't AWU the one that had bought Christmas gifts? The AWU was at MLB.
The gift for employees.
Yeah. Are you familiar with that, David?
I am, yeah. So those are, every holiday we do a director's breakfast for all the directors, so we pitch in and basically for breakfast for staff. And we generally hand out some sort of a safety incentive type item to staff, kind of the water bottle and the safety shirt, something like that. That's what we're purchasing for. And I believe we got approval through Mike after the fact on that one.
I don't, we've done it both before and after the fact, but those typically require the manager's approval, and in 2015 and 2016, I have approved what I would call small dollar cost items for employees at AWU.
Like water bottles or T-shirts or whatever?
Yeah, these are items that are typically less than $20 per person.
Would you like the municipal manager to make an attempt to answer for some of the other departments and the purchases?
Yeah, and I'd just love to hear. I know he's been very involved. When he gets an audit like this, I know he's all over it. So I'd just like to hear your perspective, Mike, on, you know, what you found, the proactive response or the proactive measures you've taken, and the response from your department.
Sure. So we treat this program very seriously, as has been mentioned before. It saves the municipality a lot of money, but it does decentralize decision-making. And the good news is we've decentralized. The bad news is we've decentralized. So instead of having 20 or 25 decision makers on purchases like this around the municipality, we have 300 or however many P cards there are at any given time. So with that comes a series of challenges. And it's not just the P card users, it's also the approvers that come through. And frankly, that's where most of my energy is directed, through the department managers. On one level, I'm concerned that somebody thought that they could use their P card for some of these items. On another level, I'm slightly more concerned that somebody approved that purchase a couple of weeks later when they were going through and reviewing the P card activity for the employees that they supervise. So that's frankly where most of my attention comes in, is making sure that the departments are providing the right sort of supervision. It's one thing for an admin staffer to make a bad choice, either splitting purchases or making an inappropriate purchase. It's another thing when a supervisor or a manager endorses that. And so most of my energy, frankly, is directed at that second step. And that's where I'm trying to make, and I know changes have been made, and I think Mike and Ron would agree that the approvers, it was not uncommon several years ago, and I'm not just blaming the prior administration. We've been in the P card business for a long time. In my previous life here, we were dealing with this, where approvers would not even open the document that they were approving. It would be prepared by an admin staffer, and they would just pencil whip it. That is not acceptable now, and I'm increasingly confident that managers are doing their job, but not quite perfectly. So there's continues to be room for improvement. I've told Mike this before. This is an irritating audit for Mike to have to do. It feels somewhat mechanical, and you know, we don't do very many of these same audit every year. You know, through this committee's work plan, Mike and his team typically don't touch the same material more than once every 4 or 5 years. This and maybe travel are the two exceptions.
Every year we do this audit.
And I will continue to recommend that it remain an annual element of our audit. Mike is correct. The oversight that this provides adds an extra set of discipline onto P card users. And so that means that somebody's going to write an article about it every year. You know, we're basically writing the press release for the challenging article that's going to be written, but that is entirely appropriate in this case, and in our current state of play is required, so that you guys, as well as the administration, remain confident in this program.
Thank you. For the record, Mr. Croft is joining us. Rose, is this
as
being...
has, Mr. Chairman, as has Tammy Clayton, the
I'm sorry,
Municipal
Tammy.
Controller.
Yeah.
And Tammy's joined us, and she'll be available to talk about our next agenda item.
Yeah, thank you. Is this being recorded?
You are being recorded, sir. It's right next to all the people there.
Yeah.
Fred, I think that Mr. Croft may have had a question.
Yeah, I saw that. All right. Yeah, thank you. Mr. Croft? Well, we've been joined by Mr. Croft, who has a question.
Yeah, we dealt with this at the school district with a P card audit that got some press. I mean, we want to continue to do, it seems to me, what Mike said, which is continue to do this, to continue to impose that discipline. There's about $120,000 of split or otherwise questionable transactions. I mean, I guess, not a question, Mr. Chairman, but there's substantial savings, hard to quantify, from decentralizing your purchasing. And so you're not waiting for a thing that everyone knows you need while it goes through channels. And so that's the cost benefit of this. By decentralizing, we get a lot of stuff done more efficiently, and we have these things that we have to check every time. So, and those are harder to calculate and don't make as good a headline, but they're significant, I think. That's all. That was my question.
Can I just
All right.
one final question?
Mr. Bosky.
Mr. Abbott, just looking at the department, I don't know if it's just the nature of the beast because of the businesses they're in, but it seems that ML&P and AFD are the ones more prevalent than any others. Is there anything special you're doing in those departments to kind of, I mean, is it change the policy because they need stuff more frequently, or their levels need to be adjusted, or is it really remedial training? I'm just trying to understand why these two departments stick out a little bit more.
So although they do have different cultures, those two departments, that they're not alone in that situation. And I'm not recommending at this point any changes in the expectations of those departments. They have struggled with compliance more than other departments. I think you'd find that. Mike can validate that they probably stood out in previous audits as well. But that doesn't mean that they can't be held to the same standards and that they won't be. They just have been a little slower in improving their behavior.
And I'm assuming with AFD, maybe this is a better question for Mike, but of these transactions, you talked about AFD, some were batteries for a fire truck. I think you said a recliner. Is this primarily happening at the senior captain level, where they're making the purchases for the stations?
I'd have to look at that, but I'm looking at the users of the P card, and that seems to be the case.
Ron, can you comment on who the owners of P cards are at the fire department? I don't have a list in front of me.
Probably glance at it and tell you.
Yeah, you'd probably.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to defer.
Can I look? I don't know if you want me. I want to get
It's not. Yeah, it's.
Amy, if you find your husband's name on there, let us know.
Becky
Yeah,
does
it's
not
a
have
conflict,
a
therefore.
He does not have a keyboard.
Yeah, we'll be looking at the coffee pots at your house.
Yeah, so we have.
Did Mike ever bring coffee home?
Yeah. Well, typically the way the fire department works is one senior captain per station is the one who has a P card. That's the difference between senior captains and captains. They make the purchases. But I would assume battalion chiefs and chiefs also have P cards.
Depends on the station.
I don't know.
I can.
I'm seeing it.
Mr. Haddon?
We have gone through all of the P card holders at one time or another, and we really try to limit who has the P cards to those folks that really need them.
Right.
You just don't get a P card because I want a P card. It's do you have a need, and are you the appropriate person to have that?
Well, just looking at this, I recognize 5 battalion chiefs on this list. So they're above the senior captain. These are the guys that are supervising. They have groups of stations. And then one of them is the guy that runs the shop. That's probably your battery purchase.
Jeff?
Yeah. So you have Urbano, Dennis, Harris, Singram. So a lot of these are battalion chief level. Some I don't recognize, so they might be senior captain.
So, Mr. Abbott, for the flagrant abusers here, does something appear in their personnel file?
If it affects their ability to do their jobs, then it does. If it is simply a purchasing item related to, if Ron suspends somebody's P card for 30 days, that probably does not show up in a personnel file.
The first time.
Like I say, if it gets to the point where someone can't do their job as a result of having their P card privileges suspended, then it would show up immediately. But the fact that just the pure suspension itself of the P card rights would not necessarily show up.
And if their card was returned to them, transferred to a different department or something, and got a P card again, and they did it again,
That would count as a second strike,
Yep.
as far as I'm concerned.
And would go
I
in
believe
their-
Ron would count it that way as well.
and would go in their file.
If that affected their ability to do their job, yes. And there are some positions where it is not a core requirement of their job. And so in those situations, it might not.
Yeah. And my own personal opinion is if they are somewhat flagrantly violating it and it doesn't affect their capacity to do the job, but they repeat that, a note ought to go in their file, but that's your business, not mine. Any other questions from the department, Mr. Steele?
Yeah, it just seems to me it's the cost of doing business nowadays. As we get more mechanized, we find ways of doing things quicker. It used to be somebody'd have to run down to the stationery store or run down and do some shopping, and maybe that's not the case now. But it's just a change, and I'm glad to see that the municipality is watching the technology and watching the use of it. It's what we have to do to ensure compliance and safety and security and perform our public responsibilities. But so I applaud that there's nobody's in jail at this point or on their way. So I think it's success. So.
And I think it's well known to answer my earlier question. None of this was for an individual person's benefit, and that's
That's the
gratifying.
copy.
So we're going to go off the record for a minute. You guys are more experienced at this than me, obviously. What should we do now? Mr. Domboski, you had mentioned maybe wanting to get departments to give you a response of what they've done and kind of remedial.
Yeah, in the past, that's how we've kind of operated, is when we have an audit that has findings, the department directors will come in and they'll tell us, okay, this is what we did to make sure it doesn't happen again. I didn't really get that specifically today, but I think listening to Ron and Mike, I think, though I didn't have a specific, it sounds like the city manager is very serious about making sure, especially the constant kind of department offenders, are going to be held to the same standard. So I'm content with that. I think it's important, especially when we have audit findings, that the employees recognize that we take this seriously. And the sense I'm getting from the city manager is they certainly do. Would you concur with that, Mike?
My job here is to support Ron Happen. So that Ron is the one that makes the rules and enforces them, and my job is to make sure that the departments take Ron's guidance seriously, and that is my responsibility here. So when Ron identifies a problem that requires my involvement, he gets it, and unequivocally.
And your response from your conversations with the directors of each of these departments is that, in fact, it has been taken seriously?
Absolutely.
Right. All right. Any other comments, recommendations? All right. And my own experience is that there will be some excursions on this, and they are from naive department leaders who haven't had a lot of experience at this level of managing employees in an enterprise, and and almost all of those I've ever run into are really nice people who want to do nice things, but the tough business of being a manager and a supervisor is not something they've had a lot of experience about. All right. Any other off-the-record discussion on this? All right. We're back on the record. Does the assembly members here object to forwarding this or for the acceptance of the assembly when we meet Tuesday next? All right. No one objects, and so we'll move on to the next item. I too am impressed with how the city has been handling this in general. Right. Ma'am, we're eager to hear about the CAFR report.
Member State Assembly, the committee, Mr. Manager. We have completed the audit for 2016. We do have the reports. It's my understanding that a meeting is set up for September 12th from 2 to 3 for the audit committee to meet to discuss the CAFR. Just to give you some highlights, we did get a clean opinion on the comprehensive annual financial report, and as you know, everything rolls up to municipality. That means AWU, Municipal Light and Power, and all the other 5 enterprise funds. With regards to our single audit, we did have 3 findings, one related to the port, one related to AWU, and one related to municipality of Anchorage. And you'll get a report on that. You know, if you have questions now, I can certainly answer them. But the findings, we are addressing all of them. And with regards to the one with the municipality of Anchorage, as the manager knows, it had to do with the railroad. We've got a letter of agreement in place, and that's being handled. So I'm confident that you'll feel confident with the audit also.
Any questions or comments from committee members?
What's the railroad issue?
Sorry?
What's the railroad issue?
Yeah, what's the railroad issue?
Mr. Chairman, annually, the municipality and the railroad need to agree on how to split a pot of federal funds. It's called the 5307 money, which is the section of federal law that generates a pot of money. It took a lot longer than typical to agree with the railroad on how to split those funds this year. And so as a result, the Muni was deficient in a revenue stream for a period of 2016. That has now been addressed. In fact, what I'm monitoring here right now is the submission of an assembly item via the addendum for your meeting next Tuesday to introduce the appropriation item that will appropriate the 5307 money. So that's the resolution that Tammy was describing. So that was not done, but when we closed 2016 a few months ago, it is done now. And so there's a note on the financial statements that say, hey, we're still expecting, I think, around $4 million from this pot of money, and where is it? And like I said, it took a while to work this out with the railroad. We have, and that will now be erased or addressed.
Yeah. Yes, everything's been addressed.
Mike, what's the 5307 money for?
It is a chunk of public transit money. It is one of the revenue streams that we rely on to fund People Mover. And it is generated through a relatively complicated formula that allocates that allows local, called urban zones, UZAs, to allocate the money between folks that provide transit or other allowable services.
Yep.
We consistently fight / confer with the railroad over who would use the money for transit functions.
I got it. So, just historically, has the city gotten into a big hassle over grade level crossings and
Yes.
electronic monitoring? I'm
Yes.
shocked.
As have, and by when you say the city, you could insert the borough and
the
folks
state.
in Fairbanks and
Yep.
AFSU. And
No, I've been in that one.
would all raise their hands at the same time.
Yep.
We have a current, what's called an area-wide permit for
yeah.
the cross. Oh, sorry.
I don't need the details now. I would enjoy an update offline. Mr. Trainee?
What's the breakdown now with railroad versus the city? Because I know in the past, railroad was trying to take all of it. So where did we end up this time with?
The railroad,
5307?
to be fair, the railroad, to my knowledge, has never suggested they should get all of it. The money flows into this pot from, through a formula that is determined by a number of factors. And those factors have to do with how many bus miles we operate, how many people are here, and also how many trains operate and how many track miles there are. The railroad, their position has always been that the funds should go out of the pot in direct proportion to how they go into the pot. And since the majority of the money comes to the pot because of the amount of rail miles that are counted, the railroad believes, and I understand their position, that that is how the money should be dispersed. The municipality has suggested that the money should be dispersed regardless of how it comes into the pot, based on who can do the most for transit within the municipality of Anchorage. The railroad disagrees with that, and so that has been our ongoing debacle. Mayor Sullivan, Mayor Begich, Wirch, Mystrom, Fink, everybody will recall, well, maybe not as far back as Fink, the formula is newer than that, but the last 20 years, everybody would recall similar fights and similar grumbling with, wondering why the railroad is getting so much transit money when they don't provide very much.
They don't do any transit.
Zero. Transit.
It's a can of worms, Mr. Chair.
Yes. More at your convenience. We know more about it now than we ever wanted to. But the good news is it has been resolved on terms that the Muni is satisfied with. And as a result, we can close out this little niggling issue on the financial statements. The transit program is made whole for the amount that the budget reflects that we would receive. And there are other, I'll call them ancillary benefits that have been negotiated with the railroad external to the 5307 money. So we created a larger conversation, and the railroad agreed with that, and as a result, we're moving forward.
Right, got it. Mr. Trainee?
Who made the decision on 5307 money? Was that done between the railroad and the city, or did it go up to somebody higher in the structure system?
You mean the most recent
Yes.
decision? It was made between the railroad and the city when we were in the midst of our disagreement. The railroad had recommended that the Department of Transportation, the Federal Department of Transportation, and or the governor and or the administrator of the Federal Transit Administration should overrule our position and essentially impose the determination that the railroad recommended. To all of those officials' credit, from our point of view, they did not take that step. And they left it to us to resolve with the railroad, which is what the federal law says. And then a resolution was finally achieved.
What's the dollar amount coming to the city?
I believe it is a little over $4 million per year. And we've just negotiated, we actually did 2 years worth because we were behind a year. So we resolved both the 2016 and 2017 allocations. And it's a matter of public record. The extra issue that was added was we had an ongoing transaction with the railroad to acquire tidelands that are inside the Port of Anchorage but are owned by the railroad. And it includes the tidelands on which we plan to build a portion of the port modernization project. We are currently leasing those tidelands from the railroad, but that lease only has another 10 years to run, and we didn't want to construct a terminal that we hope lasts 50 or 75 years on land that we only had control of for another 10 years. So we have been involved in a willing seller, willing buyer transaction with the railroad. We had, you can imagine that assessing or appraising the value of tidelands, mud, is a little challenging. And so the railroad and our appraisals were very far apart in terms of the dollar value. And the outcome of this FTA split letter, that's the term, it's called the split letter, was that the municipal appraised value would be the transaction, would be the price that we would pay the railroad for the tidelands. So that we are in the process. The assembly will be involved when we have a transaction ready to approve. But in the meantime, we have reached a tentative agreement with the railroad on the price at which we will acquire those tidelands. And it is the appraised value that the municipality determined.
One last quick question I'll get out of the way, Mr. Chairman. How much did the railroad get out of this, money-wise?
About 11 million.
Okay, that's all my questions. Thank you.
And don't hold me to the numbers, Mr. Chairman. Those are rough estimations.
Mr. Steele?
That's for the municipality, a portion of their operations within.
This is from the 5307 funds that are allocated to the Anchorage Transit Zone.
Does this mean we are going to be able to expand People Mover down in South Anchorage to quell the fears of some certain number of people down there?
This is the amount of money that we had anticipated all along.
So it's already.
So it does not, it neither adds nor subtracts from the plan that you guys have been working on or have been watching us work on.
Yeah. At various times, we have had issues between us and the railroad in terms of right-of-way, whether it be bike paths or just access to right-of-ways. Hopefully, our good relationship is still intact.
Hopefully, yes.
Any other questions, comments? Ms. Dombrowski?
Okay. Mr. Abbott answered most of my questions during his discussion, but we won't get into, I won't pull you into the port and ALU discussion today just because time is short. But when will all the documentation be ready for us to review prior to the September 12th meeting?
Through the chairman, Ms. Dombrowski, it's all ready now. It's just a matter of
Get signed off.
no, it's ready. It's, I just don't know what protocol is. I can have it to you today. I can have it to everybody that's here today and then get it to the rest of the assembly. Or Mr. Abbott, maybe you can answer that.
Typically, you guys have waited to hear from the auditor before you get the report, but I don't know that that's
I would love to read
magic.
it first because I might have better questions if I read it first.
Okay,
So,
let us consult with the CFO, who's not around. I don't know of a reason why that wouldn't be possible, but I don't want to get out in front of the CFO, and we want to make sure the auditor is ultimately comfortable with the distribution as well.
Sure.
So we'll figure that out in the next couple of days and let you know through Rose sort of what we can give you when.
that'd be super helpful. I just know if we have a September 12th audit meeting, I find the conversation is generally more informed if we read it before. That's all. I don't mean it has to be this week or today or tomorrow. I'd like to have a little bit of time to prepare.
All right. Anyone in the audience would like to participate?
When can the report be distributed beyond some members with the members of the press?
The CAFR?
The CAFR, yeah.
I don't know.
All right. And then only comment from me is I appreciate you all's service and the questions and the good. My sense of this administration is they're not hiding the ball, and that's refreshing from my previous experience. I'd like to encourage you all to be using our capacity, audit capacity, for the public purpose. And I think all of you probably get information from various sources, that somebody will say, there's a problem here, or somebody ought to look at, or, and so on. And we'll, if it's appropriate, turn our apparently really capable auditor loose on it. And as you would know, there's an auditor is not a back pocket investigator and so on, but I suspect he has a large toolbox of very effective tools that can be useful. In previous experiences, I had a lot of responsibility and thought, there's going to be an audit. Those guys will never be able to figure out my business and catch me on the places where I'm cutting the corners. They caught everything, and I was quite embarrassed about it. I later on learned to make that work for me. And if I had problems I couldn't get management's attention to, I'd tell them ahead of time, and then the auditor would come back and authenticate my brilliant insight, and we got things done. But anyways, I think there's an opportunity here for us to advance the public good, and let's use it appropriately, and so on. Rose, what have we missed?
I think you've covered it. The September 12th meeting is still tentative. When we have that confirmed, we'll have an agenda and meeting request out to members.
All right. Thank you all. We're adjourned.